After 465 days of long, arduous conflict, the battle between Hamas and the Israeli government has finally come to a close for but a moment. A ceasefire has been called, and done so at the behest of the envoys of Donald Trump sent to Israel to speak with Benjamin Netanyahu and those within his government. Truly a remarkable thing to see, and it really shows what happens when a new person steps onto the world stage that attempts to lead, that actually wields power. I'm not even the biggest fan of Donald Trump, but by God, if he can get this done, if he can bring the war in Ukraine to a close, if he can mend our relations with China, and after what we saw with him effectively being the person who conjured up the pullout for Afghanistan, which of course then the Biden administration extended the timeline and fumbled the ball on the pullout, this very well may be something worthy of putting him on something like Mount Rushmore. Of course, Donald Trump, being Donald Trump, will want his own mountain, but nonetheless, I digress. It is truly a remarkable thing to see and something to celebrate, but something to point and mock would be that of Joe Biden and his administration trying to take credit for the actions of what we see going forward with the recent announcement of this ceasefire. Something fantastical out of the most ridiculous nonsense bullshit fairy tale that you could possibly imagine would be that the Biden administration wielded power in any fashion that brought the devastation of what was rocking Palestine to a close. It is truly something that I could not even fathom in the most wild of my dreams. But of course, here we see politicians once again trying to take credit for things that they had effectively no part in and were only making things worse. Anyways, what we need to go ahead and address here specifically would be the fact that while this ceasefire has been brought forward, and it is a fantastic thing to see, we will be able to see innocent Israeli hostages go home, as well as Palestinian prisoners that have been captured and held captive by the Israeli government go home to their families, God willing they are still alive. The thing that we need to address here is that sadly this ceasefire is only for but a moment, as it has a 6-week timetable, and even with the announcement of it, within 12 hours of it, Israel already broke it in some way by dropping a bomb on a refugee camp that ended up killing roughly 30 people. Absolutely horrific, and it makes you wonder, what are we going to see on the horizon after this ceasefire comes to a close once Israel has its hostages back? Will this be the end of this conflict? Will there be peace talks and negotiations on the horizon so we can have a real conversation about seeing this travesty of what this endless war between these two peoples has brought us to the point of in this current day? Or are we going to see the endless devastation of Gaza once more in a fashion that makes it look like what we once saw previously was nothing more than child's play? And if that's the case, my goodness, I truly can't imagine what lies down the road, as what we've already seen happen in Gaza is every single school, every single college destroyed, every single hospital turned to rubble and ash, even some of them with people inside of them. But of course, that doesn't matter to the Israeli government, because in their eyes, they're doing what they have to tackle Hamas as a threat in the pursuit of making sure they can save their hostages. But in the process of relentlessly carpet bombing Gaza, you very well may have been killing many of the hostages that you claimed you cared to save. So now let's go ahead, jump in, and see what we've got with the evolution of this story around the Gaza ceasefire. Starting with first post, here we see Gaza ceasefire. After 15 months and over 46,000 deaths, Israel and Hamas agree to end war. A timeline. This is well worth going into if you have the time to go ahead and dive in. But alas, what we need to realize is within these 15 months of these 46,000 dead, which I would argue it's probably more, but nonetheless, we need to realize that over half of the people killed have been innocent women and children. But that's not something that's ever addressed when the media talks about this for the most part. Of course, we see First Post addressing these things honestly, and in many times, the only place you're actually going to get real raw numbers that are going to be tackling these things is from Israeli news outlets, because they're talking about what their country is doing, and many people within Israeli society, in fact, most, do not support the rabid actions of the IDF and the Israeli government. They're just simply people going along, doing their thing, trying to live their lives, and when they see children suffering, starving, dying, they feel the same thing that you feel. Sorrow in their soul because it hurts them because that's a child. That is what we need to address here. The fact that Benjamin Netanyahu is going and stepping outside the bounds of his standard parameters of control, effectively reorienting his way back into power, now the longest serving prime minister in Israeli history, very well knowing that once we see this conflict brought to an end, there will be calls for him to have justice brought forward upon him for the actions that he's taken, not only for the fact of what he's done to Gaza with his leadership, but also the fact of what he's done to make sure that he could stay in power. Also, many rumors circulating that one of the reasons that Benjamin Netanyahu wants to keep this war going, which I fully agree with, is because it keeps the eye on something else that is not him, because he knows when this conflict stops, that's when the buck stops, and that means everyone's going to have their eyes and crosshairs then placed upon Bibi himself, and that is an absolute no-go in his eyes. Moving on now, here we see from the Times of Israel, Arab officials say Trump's envoy swayed Netanyahu more in one meeting than Biden did all year. Take that in for a moment. Tense Jerusalem sit-down led to breakthroughs in talks with Israel and Hamas agreeing in principle to a hostage deal 2 days later, sides now finalizing implementation and details. And of course we see that Trump just about to get into power on the 20th, and I say this again, not even the biggest Trump fan. I like some of the things he does. I like the way he says things because it's funny, but my God, it's so fascinating the way that he just goose steps himself across the political stage. What we see here from CNN Politics, how the Biden and Trump teams work together to get the Gaza ceasefire and hostages deal done. There you have the Biden administration, as well as the regime media, not wanting to give Donald Trump credit for this, with the fact that it was undoubtedly his thumb on the scale that ended up causing this conversation to unfold and this ceasefire to be achieved. Of course, Joe Biden wanting to go out on a win, which by God he could undoubtedly use one, but nonetheless no one's buying it. Here we see from The Independent, Trump credited for ceasefire breakthrough as U.S. officials who resigned over Gaza war slam Biden's inaction. Officials said breakthrough came when Trump applied pressure on the Israeli government, something Biden was unwilling to do. And for anyone who has their head screwed on straight, it is quite apparent that that is what was going on, and even Benjamin Netanyahu was very well aware of that. Here we see proof of exactly what I just stated. Netanyahu, unlikely to attend Trump inauguration, hasn't had official invite, the aide says. The premier, who had just had surgery and whose arrest is sought by the ICC, was nonetheless previously said to be planning on attending. That's right. Isn't that just remarkable? And all of this comes down the pike of the action of what was going on with the rumblings behind the scenes of Donald Trump advocating for a ceasefire and Benjamin Netanyahu not being a fan of that. But the thing that really ended up tipping the scale and causing this specifically, it was a post that was put out by Donald Trump, a clip of Jeffrey Sachs talking about the wars in the Middle East, how all of these conflicts that we've had so consistently brewing over the last 20 years, they come at the behest of Benjamin Netanyahu's desires for the Greater Israel Project. So now let's go ahead and throw it into that clip that Donald Trump tweeted into the ether that shifted the dynamic of what we see going on with the Israel-Palestine conflict and how he is now perceived by the upper echelon of the Likud party in Benjamin Netanyahu's government.
The war in Syria, and you may actually hear from grown-up reporters who are lying through their teeth or ignorant beyond imagining that, oh, the war in Syria, yes, Russia intervened in Syria. Well, do you know that that Obama tasked the CIA to overthrow the Syrian government, starting 4 years before Russia intervened? What kind of nonsense is that? And how many times did the New York Times report on Operation Timber Sycamore, which was a presidential order to the CIA to overthrow Bashar al-Assad? 3 times in 10 years. This is not democracy. This is a game. And it's a game of narrative. Why did the U.S. invade Iraq in 2003? Well, first of all, it was completely phony pretenses. It wasn't, oh, we were so wrong, they didn't have weapons of mass destruction. They actually did focus groups in the fall of 2002 to find out what would sell that war to the American people. Abe Schultzke, if you want to know the name of the PR genius. They did focus groups on the war. They wanted the war all the time. They had to figure out how to sell the war to the American people, how to scare the shit out of the American people. It was a phony war. Where did that war come from? You know what? It's quite surprising. That war came from Netanyahu, actually. You know that? It's weird. And the way it is that Netanyahu had from 1995 onward the theory that the only way we're going to get rid of Hamas and Hezbollah is by toppling the governments that support them. That's Iraq, Syria, and Iran. And the guy's nothing if not obsessive. And he's still trying to get us to fight Iran this day, this week. He's a deep, dark son of a bitch, sorry to tell you, because he's gotten us into endless wars, and because of the power of all of this in the U.S. politics, he's gotten his way. But that war was totally phony. So what is this democracy versus dictatorship? Come on, these are not even sensible terms.
And there you have the thing that ended up tipping Benjamin Netanyahu into the camp of not attending Donald Trump's inauguration to become the 47th president of the United States. And it is truly something remarkable to see, and so openly brazen how despotic the mindset of someone like this is, that when a ceasefire deal is brought forward to bring home the hostages that you claim you care so much about, you then effectively act like a child on the world stage, as do many of those within your government, revealing the despotic nature of their mindset as well. Here we see, from the times of Israel once more, Ben-Gvir says he repeatedly foiled hostage deals and urges Smotrich to help him stop this one as well. Unbelievable, but when you go ahead and you look back on the policy of what has been enacted by the Israeli government before, as well as the fact of what lies on the horizon and things like the Samson option, which is quite a fascinating thing that I highly recommend you go ahead and look up, I think it's something that truly does show that these people will do anything to achieve their goal. And I don't mean that as in Jews. I mean that as in government bureaucrats that will gladly sacrifice the blood of their own that they claim to care so much about, all at the behest of their desired end goals, which in this specific instance is that of Greater Israel, which is no conspiracy theory, as the IDF has been wearing it as a patch on their sleeves for over a year now. And a perfect example of that utter evil mentality that so many within the Israeli government have been exuding as of late would be that of the Hannibal Directive. IDF officers invoked defunct Hannibal Protocol during October 7th fighting. And what is the Hannibal Protocol, you might ask? Here we see it is the name of a controversial procedure used by the Israeli Defense Force to prevent the capture of Israeli soldiers by enemy forces. According to one version, it says that the kidnapping must be stopped by all means, even at the price of striking and harming our own forces. It was introduced in 1986 after a number of abductions of IDF soldiers in Lebanon and subsequent controversial prisoner exchanges. The full text of the directive was never published, and until 2003, Israeli military censorship forbade any discussion of the subject in the press. The directive has been changed several times, and in 2016, Gadi Eisenkot ordered the formal revocation of the standing directive and the reformulation of the protocol. With an understanding of the Hannibal Directive, as well as the mindset of those within the Israeli government, we have to ask ourselves certain questions that are quite uncomfortable to do so. Much like many people within the Israeli society, Israeli government and military are all now asking themselves or each other. And I shouldn't say all, but you get my point nonetheless. This is a conversation that has been going on for quite some time. Is it that we saw something akin to the Hannibal Directive enacted on October 7th in the pursuit of countering Hamas's bombardment of Israel's borders and their attempt to capture Israeli civilians? And if so, is that the reason why the death toll was so astronomically high and Israel wouldn't allow an independent investigation? It is very, very unnerving, to say the least, but when you have an understanding of how it is that Netanyahu and his government have operated when it comes to the fact of the manufacturing of Hamas itself solely for the purpose of destabilizing the Palestinian Liberation Organization, only for the reason of making it so on the world stage it seemed like Israel had no real partner for peace. And because of this, we now see that, well, the consistent and endless funding of Hamas has now brought the devastation upon the people of Israel, and now, sadly, the cataclysm of the utter annihilation of what has befallen the people of Palestine. And all of this could have been avoided had Benjamin Netanyahu not jumped into the fray to initially fund the creation of this organization in the first place to, and I quote, control the height of the flame. But you know what's even more fascinating, specifically just in the current day of what we're dealing with when it comes to relevant information of being able to counter current threats? The fact is that Netanyahu's government was in fact aware of this because they understood what was going on a year prior, as they had received blueprints for this attack, but decided not to act because they didn't think it was within Hamas's capability. Here we see from the New York Times, Israel knew Hamas's attack plan more than a year ago. A blueprint reviewed by the Times laid out the attack in detail. Israeli officials dismissed it as aspirational and ignored specific warnings, and in doing so, it cost the lives of all of those Israelis that were killed, and all of the Palestinians that have now been slaughtered in the subsequent response. Unbelievable, and things like this are exactly why Benjamin Netanyahu has a warrant out from the ICC for him to be arrested for war crimes and crimes against humanity, as is undoubtedly deserved. But the thing that's so insane is, even after this ceasefire comes to a close, it appears that the warrants for the fact of his arrest, they're not enough to stop him from committing even more war crimes. Here we see, alarming to the hostage negotiators, the Prime Minister of Israel says that they should be upfront about the plan to resume the war after the deal. Unreal. If you would like more information about what's going on with this conflict, please go ahead, dive into this article here from antiwar.com, written by Dave DeCamp, one of the best out there if you want to know what's going on with conflicts around the world, especially with the fact of what's going on with U.S. involvement in funding many of these different ordeals. Here we see Israel and Hamas reach Gaza hostage and ceasefire deal. The deal still needs to be formally approved by the Israeli government, which is expected to happen on Thursday. God willing, this is actually the case of how this unfolds. I am recording this on Thursday, and as I do so, I am anxiously awaiting the announcement that the ceasefire has been finalized. Here we see, to finish this off, a post from Glenn Greenwald screenshotting what Donald Trump put out onto Truth Social. It reads, Trump celebrates what he called the epic ceasefire agreement, saying it only happened because he won and Biden-Harris lost in November, which is obviously true, and I would have to agree with Glenn Greenwald there entirely. Now on to what Trump had to say in its entirety. We see the epic ceasefire agreement could have only happened as a result of our historic victory in November, as it signaled to the entire world that my administration would seek peace and negotiate deals to ensure the safety of all Americans and our allies. I am thrilled American and Israeli hostages will be returning home to be reunited with their families and loved ones. With this deal in place, my national security team, through the efforts of Special Envoy to the Middle East Steve Witkoff, I should say, will continue to work closely with Israel and our allies to make sure Gaza never again becomes a terrorist safe haven. We will continue promoting peace through strength throughout the region as we build upon the momentum of this ceasefire to further expand the historic Abraham Accords. This is only the beginning of great things to come for America and indeed the world. We have just achieved so much without even being in the White House. Just imagine all of the wonderful things that will happen when I return to the White House and my administration is fully confirmed so they can secure more victories for the United States. And it is truly a remarkable thing to see that Donald Trump is being the man who is effectively the peacemaker in this situation, which I give him this. This is exactly what he ran on in 2015 when he first goose-stepped his way into the political landscape. He looked Jeb Bush straight into his eyes and said, what? Your brother lied us into the war in Iraq. We got 1 million people killed, he lied and people died, and we lost our bravest young men and women all to this conflict which was sold on a lie. And who is it that sold that lie? It was Benjamin Netanyahu. I'm going to go ahead and call it there. Thank you for watching if you got this far. Thumbs up if you liked it, thumbs down if you didn't. Tell me where I'm wrong in the comment section down below. Stay lovely, stay great, and most importantly, my friends, please go tell someone you love them. Peace out.